everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, in 2012 the movie Dark Shadows was released, and what was my expectations of this movie? Well, considering that it was going to be directed by Tim Burton, one of my all-time favorite directors ever, and it was going to star Johnny Depp, I didn't need to know anything else, because this was at the point where I absolutely loved everything Johnny Depp did. This was basically slightly after the absolute high watermark of his career, because he had been enjoying 10 years, maybe even a bit more, of people, you know, soaking up everything he did. Whatever he did, they just said, wow, excellent, awesome, fantastic. And around this time, some, criticism will start to come up. Maybe, that was a little bit too silly. Maybe, he overdid that a little bit, and maybe didn't have that much good material to work with, with this movie or that movie or whatever they were saying. But he was still very popular, The downturn would, come a few years later. But the thing is that I had huge expectations for this movie. How did those expectations pan out? I freaking loved Dark Shadows. But I felt compelled to rewatch this movie for the purpose of this review, and I found out that it's actually not as good as I remembered it to be. I don't know what it is, but I seem to remember watching a slightly different movie than the movie that was actually released. There was a lot more of the things I didn't approve of that much, and there was a lot less of the things that I thought was absolutely fantastic. But this is still going to be a largely positive review, considering that I love most things that happens in this movie. I just wish it was more of certain things. But let's find out what's happening in this movie, because boy howdy, there's quite a lot of stuff happening in this movie. By the way, Johnny Depp gets to make out with Miss Heathcote in this movie. He gets a blowjob by Miss Bonham Carter, and he gets to have epic sex with Miss Green. Can I also be a vampire, please? Anyway, let's find out what this movie is about. This is Dark Shadows. It's the end of the 18th century in Maine, and the Collins family has just arrived here, from England, and they're going to create a new life for themselves. And, they start to invest in the fishing industry, and they become, very important people. And, the settlement that is, growing up here is actually called Collinsport, and actually becomes a real city. And they also build this huge, epic castle where they live in and stuff like that. Things are looking pretty damn good for the Collins, doesn't it? Well, we then also have Barnaby Collins, who is the oldest son, and he loves his life and stuff like that. But there's this small little problem, you see, because he rejects the invitations of a servant girl who also dabbles a little bit with witchcraft. When he says that, I don't love you, I am betrothed to this woman and I'm going to marry her and stuff like that, and she doesn't take kindly to that form of rejection, and she puts a curse upon the family in particular, and he specifically, and makes his bride jump off a cliff and stuff like that. And when he tries to, commit suicide and stuff like that, she turns him into a vampire. And when he still rejects her, he, has this townspeople bury him in a coffin, and, I will let you out of here, as soon as you decide to love me, or whatever she demands of him. And then Collinsport sort of falls into ruins. Fast forward to 1972, where we have this woman Victoria coming into Collinsport to be, the nanny to David, who is the youngest son of the Collins. We also have the older daughter, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, and the mother, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. We also have, her husband, and also a gardener, played by Jackie Earle Haley, who I will always regard as Rorschach. I'm not locked up here with you, you're locked up here with me. Ooh, I love that so much. Anyway, outside of Collinsport, we have a bunch of very unfortunate construction workers who accidentally digs up a coffin, and inside of it is a very, very thirsty Barnabas Collins, who after having killed all of these construction workers, trying to find out, what has happened and how long he has been there and stuff like that. And he has no, concept of time, and he doesn't understand, modern appliances and things like that. And he, goes to Collinsport, and he sees that, the old castle that he loved so much is now in ruins, and, that the family is, almost bankrupt and stuff like that. He also finds out that the witch is still alive. Angelique, played by Eva Green, is sort of running Collinsport, and, has all the fishing boats in the area, and, resides over this thing. And he visits the family, and, Michelle Pfeiffer tells them that, well, he's a relative from England, and he's not a vampire and stuff like that. And he vows to help them, and he wants to, bring the Collins name back into prominence again. And is he going to succeed? And what happens when Angelique finds out that Barnabas is back? And if he, rejects her again, will she then target, the new family? And will, Barnabas be able to protect them from her wrath or anything like that? That's sort of kind of what this movie is. And we also have Victoria, experiencing ghosts and stuff like that. And we will get to why that is sort of a bit distraction for this movie, and a little bit of a, arrangement failure that this movie has. But let's focus on what I really love about this movie. Johnny Depp in this movie is so fucking great, because he's just deadpanning himself around this and doesn't understand anything of the modern appliances, and, just blurt out these insanely stupid things that is absolutely hilarious. Normally, I have a huge problem with fish out of water stories. I think they can be quite tiresome. There are, exceptions. The Visitors is absolutely amazing, and this is probably one of my favorite examples of how to do this right, because he sort of never learns anything. He's just, doesn't understand things in the most entertaining way possible. And I actually remember this movie being a lot more funny than it was, because it has a lot of this dark, twisted humor, and I thought it was a lot more of the fish out the water story than what it actually is, because there's a lot of spooky, gothic ghost stories and stuff like that floating around in this thing, and it doesn't really mesh that well with the recreation of the Collins Empire and them trying to fight off Angelique and stuff like that. It kind of sort of works, but not as well as I remembered it to be. But that is okay, because we have this fantastic gallery of incredibly colorful and very entertaining characters. Chloe Grace Moretz is fantastic. Eva Green is absolutely amazing as this very delightfully evil witch, and Michelle Pfeiffer is her usually stoic presence, which I absolutely love. Jackie Earle Haley is great as the gardener, and we have a bunch of interesting small side characters that fills out the ranks. And the things that really work for me in this movie is, the dark, twisted humor when it comes up, with the hippies and stuff like that. That was absolutely hilarious. They don't understand what kind of danger they are in. And the interactions between Johnny Depp and Eva Green is absolutely fantastic. Oh, I almost forgot. We also have Dr. Hoffman living with the Collins. She's played by Helena Bonham Carter, but this is not a classical whacked up Helena Bonham Carter performance. It's actually, she plays sort of against what the expectations is for a Helena Bonham Carter performances, and she's pretty much excellent in this movie also, but she is a little bit different, and I kind of like that. So this movie is very entertaining, and there is a lot of fun things going on here, and you're not quite sure where we're going with this one. But then we also have the thing that I didn't like in this movie originally, but now is sort of an even worse problem than before when I rewatched this movie, and that is the last 15 minutes of this movie. In the last 15 minutes of this movie, they try to cram in about 45 minutes of plot. Not only did they try to do that, but they also had a kind of haphazard, a little bit confusing, very rushed ending that felt more like, the final episode of the first season of a TV show rather than the end of the movie. By the way, Dark Shadows is apparently based on a TV show that I have never heard of and probably will never see, but that's a story for another time maybe. So They also had a lot of sequel baiting here, which I always find to be a little bit, I don't want sequel baiting in my movies unless you already are cleared to, do a sequel to this whole thing. Because this thing wasn't a huge hit at the box office, it was just left there, and these sequel baiting things of, oh, you didn't see that one coming, did ya? Kind of a things, feels a little bit flat now. Especially when you know that, we're never gonna get that sequel. But despite the sometimes lack of focus and the sort of indecisiveness of whether or not to tell more of a comedic story, or if they wanted to tell a spooky ghost story, or if they want to tell this sort of romantic thriller kind of a thing, and despite all of those things, I still find this movie to be enormously entertaining, mostly because of Johnny Depp. And we just have so many fun characters and fun moments that I am all for it. But I do have two questions. You had access to the actual Vincent Furnier in this movie, but the only thing that he does is perform No More Mr. Nice Guy as Alice Cooper. But the thing is, No More Mr. Nice Guy would come out 1973, not 1972. Slightly plot hole there, buddy boy, but why couldn't they have given him, the Wayne's World treatment where, he would interact with Johnny Depp? I mean, they formed a band together, the Hollywood Vampires. Actually have their first CD. It's a perfectly fine CD, by the way. And also, why couldn't Christopher Lee had a bigger role in this one? He's just there for one sequence and basically being the butt of the joke of the "these are not the droids you're looking for" thing, basically. So why? Was he too ill, or couldn't you, write materials for Christopher fucking Lee? Oh, by the way, we almost forgot this thing. Victoria. Now, Victoria is sort of the character that introduces us to the story, so you're thinking that she's going to be a very important part of the movie, and I actually remembered her story and involvement in this whole thing being a lot bigger than it actually was. She's kind of sidetracked after Barnabas has been awakened from his long slumber. But she is kind of a very important character in this movie, and they try to sort of shoehorn her into the story towards the end of the movie by having her backstory in a long, flashback sequence. But I thought that thing came a little bit too late and was a little bit too, I don't know, shoehorned in is maybe the word. But otherwise, I really recommend this movie, despite some negativity that it is throughout this movie, because it is so entertaining. But this is also a sort of a niche product. This will not, be liked by everybody. Some will say that this is too silly, and some will say that it is too unfocused, and they're trying to do too many things at the same time. And I would kind of agree with them, but I still like this movie so much. I think this could have been a lot better if they would have, made this more of a comedic fish out of water story, or if they had to do a spooky gothic ghost story, then do so, because frankly this is a Tim Burton special when you think about it. This is everything that I love about his sort of movie making. The characters, the sets, the cinematography, the music, it's all here and it is all wonderful. If you like Tim Burton's movies, I think you're going to like this a lot. And even if you don't necessarily like Tim Burton or Johnny Depp, I think you will still find things you will like about this movie. But many people, I think, will find this movie to be a little bit unfocused and having a little bit too much of the the Johnny Depp overacting trope. But I love the Johnny Depp overacting trope. That's one of my favorite things of all time. So I still like this movie a whole lot, even though it was not as good as when I watched it back in 2012. It's a fun, creative, very fast-paced vampire story with a lot of fun and interesting characters and a lot of unexpected moments. I give Dark Shadows 70 points. There is a lot of things in this movie that feels a little bit rushed by, and there is stuff in this movie that I could have, left without. And there's also these sort of things that sometimes happens in movies about vampires that makes me a little bit, I don't like that thing. Especially when vampires appear outside, sort of in the sunlight, but not entirely, without any consequences because they sort of covered up and stuff like that. I always hated when they do that. Commit to the vampire thing or do not commit to the vampire thing. Pick a fucking lane. I think it is a tremendous amount of fun with a very good lead, a bunch of very likable characters, and a magnificent villain. What more do you want? Maybe a little bit more focus, but otherwise that, what more do you want? Jesus Christ, it's cold today. I should have brought mittens. It's minus 18 degrees today, so I'll see you next time anyway from so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.